Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our second session of the day, the Grad Enrollment Management Landscape and NAGAP discussion. This is a panel discussion, and we are joined by a few folks that are actually part of NAGAP, one former past president. The group will be joined by Naronda Wright, Director of Grad Admissions at Augusta University, Ryan Taughrin, Assistant Dean of Enrollment Management at the University of Buffalo, Graduate School of Education, Marcus Hanscom, Director of Graduate Admissions at Roger Williams University, Jeremiah Nelson, who is the past president of NAGAP and Assistant Professor of Management and a Program Director of the MBA program at Catawba College's Kettner School of Business. And also my colleague, Jenna Briggs, Senior Director of Enrollment and Marketing Strategy at Carnegie. But before we get started, we have a few housekeeping things that I wanted to just pass along to everyone. The sessions will be recorded, and we'll be passing along links to the recordings at some point, either later this week or probably sometime next week. The attendees, you are all muted and you are off camera, so we cannot see you or hear you, but we do have the chat function on for any questions that you want to have presented to the folks on the panel. So please bring the questions on, and be sure to get them to the panel as we have time that's allowed. Also, if you need any help during the session or anytime throughout the conference, you can email marketing@carnegiehighered.com. And of course, just make sure you check out the hub page for any agenda information at any time. And we certainly encourage you to be social. So please use the hashtag #TheConnection and tag @CarnegieHQ. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jenna to get things started. Jenna, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And as Kevin mentioned, if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. We're hoping this is going to be engaging and interactive. So we have a couple questions that we've already kind of talked about, we're going to be discussing, but we'd love to weave your questions in throughout the conversation as well. All right, so we're just going to start it right off. First question to the panel is, what have you seen to be the biggest change in graduate enrollment management over the past 2 years? Ryan, we'll start it with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today about some unique items of grad enrollment. So I think that the biggest piece we've seen in terms of changes within grad enrollment management over the past 2 years is an acceleration of all things virtual and flexible, right? It starts with virtual information sessions, virtual campus tours, virtual options to meet students' needs where they're at. And then that has only pushed itself further with respect to virtual programs, virtual master's degrees, flexible hybrid options with respect to micro-credentials, stackable certs, and being able to do that across academic and functional areas. So a quick example within my realm, within education, we have seen more students ask about fully online teacher certification programs that also include, being anywhere across the state to do their student teaching, which, while it's one thing to do coursework online, it's another to have the flexibility to meet someone's needs for a student teaching placement or a clinical placement along those lines. So from the prospect phase all the way through our enrolled students, we're just seeing a hyper acceleration of a 24/7 kind of on-demand, always available information architecture that maybe we knew was coming within the grad enrollment space, but was fast-tracked for a variety of reasons.
I think by extension, Ryan's talking about the virtual pieces. Obviously, that means our digital marketing space is so much more crowded than it used to be. So financially, that's a little bit of a strain for many of us because we aren't sitting on giant pots of money. And our schools are have to start to invest more in digital marketing, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, but also being more strategic in how we target students appropriately online. And we've talked a lot more as an association, but also on our own campuses about developing more content, really providing content that's relevant to the students, that's consumable in an organic way, that's not necessarily a sales pitch, but more about what it's like to get a teaching certification in the state of New York, for example, or what's it like to get a license as a mental health counselor that like we've provided our school. So there's a lot of kind of content that we can provide that's more kind of evergreen that helps support students through their funnel. And then the more personalized it is, I saw a great article posted yesterday about kind of the campus tours and how students at the undergraduate level, if they're not resonating with their tour guide, they're less apt to choose a school. So if you think about how we as humans are choosing based on belonging and how we feel connected to an institution or connected to people, how are we able to deliver that electronically, for one, because there's so much more being consumed online, but two, still convincing people that they need to come to campus. And I know students that I've seen, especially the last 2 years, but still kind of trickling post-COVID, there's been more of a shift toward visiting later in the funnel. And I've seen that from a lot of my colleagues as well, that many students are not visiting early on as prospects or even as early applicant stages, but instead maybe after they're admitted, and they're choosing to spend just their money on going to those specific places that they know they've gotten into and have a real shot at being at. So that's changing our whole shift too. And how can we kind of give a visit experience, so to speak, online and give students some of those key things that we know are good for yielding them, but doing that earlier in the funnel, especially when more of their behavior is stealth and they're not connecting with us.
And just to add to that, I think accessibility and the ease of applying is definitely something that has shifted for us. I know at my current institution, we've just opened what we call AU Online, where we're trying to target students and put more grad programs online with a streamlined admissions process, a streamlined application, just to kind of get them in, because they do want that 24-hour, that instant access. They want to know if I apply today, they want to know tomorrow that they're admitted. So just kind of moving up in that area in the grad realm is new for us. And it's definitely something that's needed. A lot of students are wanting to do things online. With the traditional student that we've seen over the last 20 years is not the traditional student that's coming in our doors now. They're are seeking admission to our institution. So being able to adapt and, as Ryan said earlier, be flexible and meet the needs of those students wherever they are, because a lot of them don't want to come to our campuses, especially at the grad level. They're looking for the quickest way to get their degree, so they get their credentials, to get a raise at work. So we have to adapt and be able to provide that in the grad realm.
Just to add on a little bit more, I think in terms of shifting expectations of students, the bar has been raised in terms of especially online education and digital engagement with prospective students, with students once they're enrolled in the program. A lot of schools were able to get away with a bare bones online engagement strategy in the past, and those days are gone because students expect more, increase. I think that was coming anyway, but that certainly was accelerated because of the pandemic and forcing so many of us to go online. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I think is a little bit interesting and an add-on of what Ryan had mentioned in terms of the competitive marketplace. My school is a good example of a campus that had very limited graduate program offerings, but a lot of the faculty that had not ever taught online were suddenly capable and interested in that flexibility, in more confident in their skills to be able to deliver a meaningful experience online. And so even small liberal arts schools like mine are willing to offer some online graduate education that just adds to the portfolio of options that exist in the marketplace and make it even more competitive than it was before. So that's been kind of fun and interesting to watch.
I think too, Marcus made a really good point that I don't want to lose sight of as well, about this digital content and evergreen content and like how that's used for marketing. Maybe 2 or more years ago, someone could have easily said, "Oh, our program is too niche, or it's too, it's really small. We don't need to worry about that." That is no longer an acceptable answer. It maybe shouldn't have been before either, but figuring out which third-party partners, which people that you need to go outside of your institution to partner with, to figure out how to be creative to find those audiences or to find those personas, is more important than ever before. And you need to have that kind of inbound content or that evergreen content ready to be creative, both to meet those needs of those students and also think a bit more broadly about how those programs can be delivered and who those audiences are, because those answers won't help you really meet your enrollment goals the way they may have before too.
Yeah, I would throw one thing in there as well. piggybacking on what Marcus said about that crowded digital space. You know, we have a lot of institutions that had been advertising in the digital space are doubling down to try and maintain their foothold in the market as new programs or new institutions are investing for the first time. Carnegie partners actually with NAGAP every year to do a digital insight survey. And one of the biggest takeaways, at least for me, that we got from this past one, and we kind of flipped the script a little bit, we interviewed students. It was over 4,000 prospective graduate students from across the country, you know, answered a variety of, it was a great spread in terms of the degrees they were seeking. It was a nationwide response, but 6 in 10 students, when they were doing their graduate search, 6 in 10 did not start their search by putting in the institution's name or even the program that they were going to be going into. So they're searching these really broad-based things like graduate business degrees in Michigan, you know, advanced teacher certification in Massachusetts. You know, so one of the things that Marcus actually talked about at the NAGAP conference was, how do you show up and make sure it's you they're seeing when they don't know it's you they're looking for? So while paid digital is very, very important in PPC and all that thing, don't lose sight of organic search and search engine optimization to make sure that you're showing up in that non-branded search when they're not knowing it's you that they're looking for, even what particular program they're looking for. I do like that Jeremiah did put in the chat, if anyone can't see it, all of the NAGAP research produced by NAGAP and its partners, like the survey I just mentioned, or the Digital Insights Report with Carnegie, are available to NAGAP members. And that is a fantastic shameless plug. Thank you, Jeremiah, for showing that and sending that in there. And yeah, that's very true. Fantastic information for everyone in the field. All right, moving on to the next question. With the impending undergraduate enrollment cliff, I know everyone's seen the witchy data, we don't need to belabor that. A lot of institutions are focusing on and supporting in terms of personnel, budget, graduate enrollment for the first time. What advice would you give to these offices in terms of prioritizing their needs? So for these grad offices that are saying, where do I even start? What would you all suggest?
I'll go first again. I'll just jump in. I think the first thing that's possible is ensuring that if you have a CRM, if you have a, you know, whatever system you're using for your drip communications is as personalized to the program as possible at bare minimum, right? The idea that you might have some messages that go out to all interested grad students, or like that's been the case for a while. Spending the energy and time to ensure that those are program or audience or kind of delivery method specific is the first, I think, lowest hanging fruit in terms of prioritizing needs, because the fastest way to turn off a prospective grad student is to send something that is so clearly not in any way, shape, or form kind of directed towards some of their interests. And for a lot of folks, they're resource constrained, they're human capital constrained. But if you're going to start somewhere, I think that is the beginning step of ensuring that part of your plan is robust and taken care of.
I think one thing that I always like about these panels is that we're all coming from different schools and different focus areas. And, you know, I have roughly 2/3 of our school students at Roger Williams are coming right out of undergrad. So we have a very full-time market that are focused on campus experience and student life and that kind of stuff, in addition to their graduate experience. But then we've got the part-timers that all have something different. But I think the key message for everyone here, and the grad folks on the line get this, and I hope there's some undergrad folks or new folks that are thinking about grad at their campuses, and that's why you're here. But the fact that grad, every one of us is different. We have different programs, different audiences. The different audiences have different needs. It's so disparate, which I think is why, you know, Ryan's pointed out a number of times through a variety of things that we have. There's such a glut. There's no data. There's no really, that's why Carnegie and R&L and others that have partnered with us have started at least the train moving in the right direction, but it's hard to get really good data to say, this is what you do. There's no silver bullet in graduate enrollment, unfortunately. We wish there was just one thing that we could do, one system we buy, one application we use, one marketing channel, and that would just solve all of our woes, but it's not that simple. There's so many different ways to tackle this, and that's true of this big kind of cliff addressing the cliff on our different campuses. And some of our campuses are very poised to be online. Some are very adult serving and more non-traditional. Others are traditional full-time. And, for those of us that have large full-time populations, we're looking at the fact that those undergrad populations that are smaller are going to be smaller coming into our graduate programs. So the full-time audiences are going to be a much different shift for us. So we have to start thinking about part-time and high flex and other things that might kind of address that. But one thing that I remember, I think it might have been in Jenna and I's session. If not, it was in one of my other ones at the summit. But talking about, I think RNL did it in their survey. One of their questions got to the number of schools that have undergraduate offices serving graduate and undergraduate under the same roof with the same people. And in my opinion, that's a mistake. Undergraduate is very largely traditional undergraduate is you're dealing with high school students. They largely have kind of the rite of passage and the plan, and they're going to college just a matter of where and their student life, yada, yada, yada. But for grad, it's a much different, the motivations are all over the map. Their needs are different, where they're searching are different, what they are looking for, and that high touch. And it's less of a sell. I remember talking on our campus about how graduate has to really, those of us that approach this in an altruistic and helping way are best poised to support graduate students. Graduate students are not ones that want to be sold the minute you start talking to them. Whereas undergraduates, you got to get right at them. Like, we're a good experience. We're better than the other schools for these reasons. This is why you'll experience us better, get them to campus and so on. Whereas graduate, they want that program, and you either have that program with the right research or the right field experiences or the right next step, or you don't. And so we have to be honest about that approach. And if you don't have staff that are skilled in working with this disparate, wide, varying audience of full-timers, part-timers, career changers, 70-year-old coming back to school for personal development folks, if you don't have somebody who can work with all of them and really truly understand their needs, you're not going to be best served, best positioned to support these students. And a lot of schools are scrambling right now because they know that undergraduate's going to be strained. And if you don't have the people in place to do that, that's really gonna be a challenge. So you really have to staff up the appropriate offices and not just tack it on as another hat of your undergraduate folks.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, Marcus, I think it's not just within your staffing, it's on the marketing side too. You can't reuse undergraduate content for the graduate market. One of the ones that always jumps into my head is when you're marketing an MSN or a DNP degree, and in good intended, right? A marketing officer, there's a picture of a young nurse in scrubs inserting an IV, and you're like, that's BSN. That this isn't what MSNs are doing. Come on, it's different content. So knowing those nuances, and again, that's not a knock on our undergrad friends and colleagues. It's just they're different. It's a completely different population you're targeting. But I think for a lot of institutions that have been so focused on that FIDIAC class, there's this thought of rinse and repeat. What we do at the undergrad level, we can do for grad. And I know I see all my colleagues, shaking heads here, nodding. It just doesn't work. Jeremiah, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to you kind of tag on to what you were saying, because really it's resources across the board. A lot of schools shift the pressure onto graduate when the undergraduate cliff is coming, but they forget that you can't just ask people to do more with less indefinitely. And especially in this job market, I mean, I have seen a mass exodus of people that work in enrollment management moving to corporate recruiting and other kinds of, still stressful, but compensating the stress accordingly, so recognizing that the resources have to shift, the marketing resources, the people resources from a staffing perspective, even on the faculty side. Like you can't fill a whole program with adjuncts. You can't fill a whole program with faculty teaching overloads. You really need to think holistically about making sure that the resources make sense with the expectations for growth that you're placing onto different programs.
I think we've all been there where it's like, July or August and undergrad missed their numbers and it's like, hey, grad, what can you do for us this fall?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the way this cliff is kind of playing out, I mean, cliff is not new news. I mean, I hate to say it. We've known this is coming. And a lot of small schools are kind of going, oops, now what? And they can't be knocking on grad's door just a couple of years before this happens. I mean, we aren't, and I don't know about you guys, but we have a pretty arduous faculty senate process to get programs created, and there's no incentives for new programs to be created and so on. So there's so many reasons why new programs aren't just going to magically pop out of the air. And to Jeremiah's point, we can't just staff them with a bunch of adjuncts. So then it's like we need more lines, but then we got existing programs that don't have enough lines. So there's just so many complicating factors there. So schools really need to have a strategic enrollment plan around graduate and really say, all right, what do we have now in our existing portfolio that can grow? And maybe it's a matter of making small innovative shifts in existing programs. Maybe it's some new innovation on the marketing side that we may have not been doing. In other cases, maybe you've totally been doing all the marketing stuff and you've maxed what you can do in certain programs, and maybe they don't have enough lines to support new students. So then you shift your efforts elsewhere. And I think a lot of schools that are really trying to grapple with this issue are throwing new programs at it. Like, oh, we're just going to add these new programs and, Marcus is going to get us 20 new students in the fall. It's like, that's not quite how it works. And not to mention, to do this right, you really need solid market research, and that's not going to happen overnight. So there really needs to be a solid plan and a lot of folks around the table from different areas to really understand how critical this is. And you need to have also decision makers at the top, or at least somebody that's a figurehead or somebody that's got a voice around the cabinet table, of which we don't. And that's not an attack on the university, it's just we don't have a graduate dean or anything like that. And I'm sure a lot of schools are similar. So if you don't have somebody advocating at the top for those resources and the time and the understanding of what's involved in these plans, it's really hard to move that needle.
I think on top of that too, I wonder how many folks who are listening today, or even in our panel here, how many of us have to be the intersection between university administration and faculty and distilling and explaining that faculty need to, the skill set of talking to faculty, talking to our, upper level administration, that often ends up with us being the go-between or the bridge. And that is a skill set that maybe many folks haven't experienced before and is unique to the grad enrollment experience. And it takes some real hard conversation and time to learn that language and to learn what's going to land with folks. I mean, Jeremiah, you're probably most uniquely prepared to talk about that more, given the role you're in now too.
Yeah, I jumped to the dark side, so
All right.
I think a lot of the things that Jeremiah and Marcus and Ryan have already spoke to were some of the thoughts that I had, but I think one of the first things I think is looking internally. It's like we say we want to increase these numbers, we want to grow graduate enrollment, but are we poised to do that? Are we in a position as an institution to move forward? Like at my current institution, I came here and it's like, all right, we need to create a graduate admissions office. They've never had a graduate admissions office. It's always worked with undergrad and grad. So I'm in a position now where I'm just trying to get that divide between undergrad and grad, as well as increase applications, increase enrollment. So it's kind of drinking from I'm like, as they say, drinking from the fire hose. That's what I'm doing right now, drinking from the fire hose. So I think we have to go through and just do that internal review ahead of time before we go jump out there. It's like, oh, we want to do this and we want to do this, because at this point now grad is being looked at to supplement the numbers where undergrad is lacking. So I think that internal review before you do anything, you kind of think big picture and holistically before we kind of jump out there.
Well, and what are the consequences if we grow? I mean, that's really, I think, what you're getting at, Naronda, right? I've got faculty in psychology that, we squeeze 25 students and, by contract, they can do 40 students in their classroom. But in a master's level clinical class, group counseling, for example, are they going to get a good quality experience at 40 students? Probably not. And we could recruit the hell out of them, but then if they all leave, that's a bigger problem. Plus, there's demands on services. There's demands on counseling on campus, for example. There's demands on student life and the types of things that we support them for, and offices that close at 5 o'clock, and all the stuff that we're familiar with. But we can't just grow and say, all right, we filled the coffers, and then come December, half those students leave, and then admissions has to pull magic out of a hat again for the next cycle. So it's a big problem.
We have a couple of really great audience questions that are very much intertwined, and a lot of them are getting at, actually, Naronda, what you were just discussing. So I'm going to try and combine them here to my best of my abilities. So how do you all work with your colleagues on the undergraduate side and within an integrated marketing communications, however you're all set up, knowing that every institution looks a little different? to make sure that the look and feel between what's coming out of undergrad and grad at least looks like it's coming from the same university, right? So knowing that we have some differences, but making sure that those brand standards, you know, are still being met. So how do you navigate navigate that, and then also talk about and share anything you can in staffing in a graduate office. We're having a lot of people put in there, hey, I stood up my first grad office. It's only me. As I build out, what do you recommend? So if any of you have some thoughts to share, again, knowing every institution looks a little bit different in terms of both working with your colleagues, the undergrad side on marketing, integrated marketing and communications, as well as staffing, and any suggestions you have for staffing in a graduate office.
I'll jump in on the branding piece. You know, have everybody else jump in on staffing, but the we've run into this at Roger Williams, and one thing that we did was we came up with a complementary color. And so we chose to have, because we have navy blue as our primary, we have gold and white as kind of our sub colors, and then for the undergrad stuff, that all works really well. But for grad, our stuff didn't look as formal as a grad student would anticipate. They were using very bubbly fonts for the undergrad and those types of things. So we were very standard in terms of how the logo is treated, using the seal, all of that. So we're very consistent on that. But we use black as a complementary color that's just on the graduate pieces. So everything still has the same logo treatment. We have our own font that's a little bit more formal, it's less bubbly. And you also have to think about taglines. Anytime you're using taglines and things, or any sort of sub-branding or themes, you know, those things that if they're not going to resonate with your audiences, you really need to revisit. I'm all for unity when you can. We used a tagline called, it just said small campus personality, big campus opportunity. And that was something that was agnostic enough that if undergrad were to piggyback on that, it wouldn't be a problem. But it was also not like pushing like, hey, we've got great food here, or, you know, things that are a little bit more, that are going to resonate with that younger audience. So definitely talk with your undergrad marketing and admissions folks. I think it's always a tug of war between the two areas and who owns what. I'm very fortunate on the graduate side that they have largely let us drive the bus as far as taglines and marketing and all of that. But as far as design, that's something we've left with marketing. So if that helps on the staffing side at all, that's one thing that I've really kind of stayed away from. You know, you guys tell us the font treatment, you guys tell us the seals and the logos and whether we can use single or double line logos and all of that kind of stuff. But beyond that, we pretty much have free reign as far as content goes. And that gets back to kind of what I was saying about staffing before. Your graduate folks really need to be the ones that are on and know your audience like that. Like I can rattle off the demographics of each of our programs pretty easily. And that's something that our marketing folks, and again, no criticism whatsoever, but I wouldn't be able to call my marketing folks and say, hey, can you tell me the demographics of X program? Because they don't know, they're not involved with that every day. And I don't expect them to know all that stuff every day. But I also expect that the relationship is strong enough that they understand that I know that and I can drive that because I understand the content and the demographics. So I think really having the right people in the right areas that know the demographics and can drive the content, and then maybe have the technical pieces driven by your graphic designers or staff that are really technically apt to do that kind of stuff, so that you're not really in a tug of war too much on content and what should be put in front of your grad or undergrad audiences.
I can jump in on a bit of the staffing part too. So just for context, always with grad, right? I'm in a decentralized unit at a public institution, right? So I'm in a school of ed. We have a staff of 5 to 6. I mainly am our director of admissions, but we have a communications person, an enrollment communications person who does a lot of what Marcus says in terms of written content, works in our CRM to ensure that items are successfully deployed there. We have a recruitment person who works to make, information sessions, individual student meetings, etc. We have an operations person who's essentially our, day-to-day application functional lead, who does the work with our CRM there, and is our leads a frontline team of 2 other individuals about phone calls, emails, and those components. And then we're pseudo cross-trained too, so we can pick up Slack. But that group, that kind of core of 4 is the starting point to make sure the key kind of items within grad enrollment management or grad admissions can be covered unique to our unit. Now that works well here, but it may not work well or may not seem feasibly possible from a staffing perspective for some others, but it might be a good or interesting kind of foundation to start from.
I think as far as staffing, like I said, I've come to a new institution, been here 90 days. a new office that I'm creating, and I inherited 3 staff members. So it's a graduate admissions office of 3 staff members and myself, so a total of 4. And they came from undergrad. So I would suggest if you're in a graduate admissions office, look for staff that are not from the undergrad realm, or at least those that are looking to move into grad would be better. Like we said earlier, undergrad and grad are completely different. The mindsets are completely different. Undergrad, you know, you're doing this, you're looking for this, you're looking for that. Grad, you have 100 programs. You can have 100 different admissions requirements. So having someone that's detail oriented, making sure that they're paying attention to it, like Marcus said, knowing the admissions requirement, knowing what's required for the programs. The staff that I have, they were trained to process paperwork. They didn't have that customer service piece, so they didn't have to deal with students or applicants calling and talking to them. There was undergrad counselors that did that for them, so they didn't have to do that. So that piece, investing that time and that energy into the customer service piece, I think will serve you well. Grad students want to know that they're cared for and that their voice matters. Even if you have 10,000 applications coming in, that one particular student wants to know that they're important. So building your staff to know that customer service first is key. Knowing your grad programs, we're in a decentralized, centralized process here. Like grad admissions, I work under academic admissions or student affairs and enrollment, but then there's a graduate school that I don't report to, but I have to work with. There's programs that fall into grad school, programs that don't fall into grad school. So there's lots of moving parts and pieces. So learning how relationship building is definitely key for me right now. So that's kind of how I'm approaching everything now, building relationships first before I come in. It's like, hey, why are we doing this? Why is it being done this way? It could be done a lot different. So relationship building, building a team, focus on customer service and servicing our students, I think are definitely key when you're looking for the staffing side.
The only other thing I just wanted to throw in there, that increasingly part of the role of the graduate enrollment staff is managing the data. And I have been successful in the past in my previous enrollment management jobs of using the data to make a case for additional staffing, to show the growth, to show the financial contribution. Those data talk and can be leveraged in order to get you what you need, because it isn't always intuitive, and it seems like just an ask to make. But if you can make an ask and really substantiate the value that this additional person can add in a quantitative way, it can really make a significant difference in terms of your success of that ask.
I'll just add one thing too that I think threads Naronda and Jeremiah's pieces pretty well. We're talking very much on the front end here. We're talking about admissions and marketing, but we're missing that whole chunk behind that. And NAGAP as a whole has really focused our efforts more on graduate enrollment management as a life cycle. And it's not just because we woke up one day and said that sounded good. It's really the reality of how our industry is moving and the graduate student needs, and also addressing the fact that most of our schools are undergraduate centered places. That's just the reality. It's not a criticism. It's just, that's the reality of most of the schools. And so, especially when, like in our case, I don't know, upwards of 85 or 90% of our revenue comes from the undergrads. So clearly you're going to focus your staffing and resources there. But as you're looking at the cliff and everything else, while we want to think about how we can shore up revenue from graduate or part-time and other areas, what are we doing about retention? What are we student life? What about making sure we graduate students on time? What about career outcomes? Are we tracking that appropriately? That gets into the data pieces that Jeremiah is talking about. And on a campus like mine, the 3 people in my office, myself included, are the only people with grad in our titles. So we're doing everything grad. I'm helping with academic probation issues. I'm dealing with graduation stuff, dealing with internship stuff. There's, you name it, is coming through our office, even though we're graduate admissions on paper. So I think again that gets back to staffing and the types of things that you might be asking your staff to do. Naronda talked about kind of like, all right, you can have folks in specific roles in undergrad because typically they have the resource bandwidth to separate people out. Whereas grad, you're going to be doing a lot of that kind of holistically within 1, 2, maybe 3 people. And that's true of both decentralized and centralized models. The decentralized folks maybe do it just for their school and they have a staff around those functions. But for centralized, smaller places like ours, I see Kathy Dilks is on the line. If you know Kathy Dilks at Sacred Heart, she's fantastic. She's the director of grad services. I hope I'm getting that right at Sacred Heart, Kathy. So she's a great resource there. But thinking about that whole post-admissions piece, making sure students are having a great experience. And I think as part of that, again, plan, a strategic plan for grad, how are you incorporating retention and who's tracking that? Who's going to be responsible for those things? Are services available to them? The last thing we want is students going to the counseling center or tutoring or something. They say, we don't service graduate students here, or we don't have resources for graduate students here. And for many of us, those resources on campus are already tapped with the undergraduate population. So it's again, very complex, but thinking about how your grad office might support, you can't have people in your grad office that go, that's not my job. I think that's one of the biggest things I've run into in the course of my 15 plus years in grad is that you really can't say no to a lot of things. You really have to help the students and connect them to the right resources, whatever it is, even if it's outside your job scope. It's just the reality of our work.
Part of that, just to tag on, we're building graduate programs kind of from scratch over the last few years at my school, and doing an audit to recognize where your gaps are, to make sure that you're kind of intentionally either outsourcing or finding resources. A shout out to a great resource that I came across called Beyond Graduate School, which is a resource for career support specifically for graduate students. And our campus has not enough career support for the undergraduate students, and certainly they don't have capacity to add on. So, as I took on the MBA role, one of the things I asked for was, I need support. I need a person and I need some resource to be able to offer these students, because they're not just coming here to get a piece of paper. Like MBA students have a goal in mind. And so we need to make sure that we're giving them what they need to get there.
Yeah, I think that's something, Jeremiah, that is so often overlooked, is how we're defining student satisfaction. And yes, obviously retention, persistence, I'm graduating, but are they graduating and going into a meaningful career? Are they able to balance, their studies with all of their other, responsibilities that they have going on? And not to say that doesn't happen in undergrad, particularly with those non-traditional students, it's there, but it's definitely more prevalent, I would say, at the grad level. All right, Naronda, this one's coming to you to start out with next. What do you see is the biggest challenge right now for graduate enrollment management professionals?
Servicing the entire student, I think, is the biggest thing. Like we've all said, there are so many different facets. I think COVID has taught us. It caught a lot of us, so to speak, with our pants down. It's like we were in a mindset of it's working, nobody's complaining, we're going to keep doing it, but we weren't thinking outside of the box. We were caught having to be reactive instead of proactive. Our students they're different. They have different needs. They have different goals in life. And we, I think as graduate admissions or graduate enrollment professionals have to be in that mindset of we're servicing the entire student. We need to know what counseling services our students need, what career services our students need. Like Marcus said, the students are coming on our campuses, even if they're online, they're looking for what resources we as an organization can offer them, what benefits for me as a graduate student coming to your institution. What am I going to get out of it besides this piece of paper that I'm going to get? So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And I think I'm in a doctorate program right now. I'm taking a student affairs class. And that was one of our conversations last night, where it's like even the advising. Grad students aren't advised to the level that they should be advised to. I went through my master's program. When I got done, my advisor didn't know it was time for me to graduate. Like I had to send him an email. So I think advising these students and servicing them to the level that they need to be serviced. When we think grad students, we think, oh, they're adults, they can handle it, they can figure it out, but they need just as much as attention, because as we see, grad education is where it is right now. So that's where the spotlight is. That's where the growth is for a lot of our campuses. So servicing our students and in a holistic way, I think is probably one of the biggest things that we in graduate enrollment management needs to focus on and work on. We can do better. We can do better with the students that we service. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me.
No, I have to laugh. I went to my first NAGAP conference in 2008 in Denver. And I remember how many conference sessions I went to there that people were like, we're being asked to do more with less. And if I could look back at my 2008 self and everybody else and just say, hold my beer, because this is clearly now, this is significantly more with less territory. And as Jeremiah pointed out, I mean, we've got a lot of people leaving. It's hard to get people in, we've got relatively low paying roles. So, I mean, if you can't get people connected to this work, which I think if it's not evident, I mean, clearly the people on this call and certainly the people I'm sure they're joining us love this work. Otherwise we wouldn't be in it. But, it's really going to become even more complicated because schools are going to be looking to us to just really, like I said, pull magic out of a hat. And we've already been doing it with less resources than we need. And we've been juggling 10 hats for many, many years. Now it's going to be 20 hats. So it's just, I think that's the biggest shift that we all have to be aware of, that from a mental health standpoint and burnout standpoint, we're going to have some really good people in this field that are going to just disappear. There already have been some, sadly, and hope that doesn't get worse.
I think one of the other items related to that too is the information our incoming students have too. If our students are coming from different walks of life and a variety of backgrounds, to Naronda's point about the whole student, I tell my team often, we have to think about the hidden curriculum of grad admissions. People don't know what they don't know, and how do we ensure that we're providing a service to students oftentimes at the first point of contact and throughout their experience, and ensuring that we, for example, my psychology program may be named the same as Marcus's, but the aims, the goals are totally different. But how do we uncover the layers of that onion for a student so they feel empowered, they know it's the right fit, they know it's what's possible? And that mindset, that service mindset, is really hard to continue with sometimes, and to ensure that you're spreading that culture across your team and then to students as well, so they don't feel uncomfortable or nervous or afraid to ask those questions, or for us to deliver that information without them having to assume they know what the questions they need to even ask are. So, the hope is that we can uncover those layers, but that gets more and more difficult as the audience of students gets wider and wider as well.
And the pressure from above to enroll as many students as your program has capacity for gets higher and higher. Yeah.
Well, one thing inherent in what Ryan shared, and I'm sure you've all seen it, how grossly underprepared most graduate students are for the search process. So I'm not trying to insult anybody, but the reality is most of these students have not been appropriately advised. I know Naronda talked about that, even at the undergraduate level. There are so many students I talk to that have not been talked about what types of doctoral programs are out there, and should they be looking at doctoral, are they ready for doc programs? Should they be going to master's level? What's the difference between those two things? What types of programs? Why should I do mental health counseling versus a psychology degree? I mean, there's just so much misinformation. And then you couple that with the fact that we have a larger college going group of first generation students. I think that's another problem, and problem sounds negative. It's a challenge for us because we've got so many first generation students who need support, who need that one-on-one extra time, a lot more of that content we've talked about that are helping people understand what this whole process is about, let alone what is this program? What about University of Buffalo, or what about Augusta? But instead, why am I looking at this field, and is a grad degree necessary, and how do I get there, and how can we develop content to support that? And if you're really looking at the cliff with a critical eye, the realities are most of the populations that are at least going to be stabilized, if not growing, are diverse populations, largely Hispanic populations. And most of our campuses are not equipped to serve these students appropriately, I would argue. I look at a pretty lily white campus where I work, and we have DEI as a principal mission for us, and we've invested in more resources and people and spaces and all the things to help support students of difference and a variety of not just color, but disability and access and so on. there's just so many things that we need to invest significantly in to make sure that students feel supported coming to our campus. And that's something we have to be ready for, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. It's predominantly white populations that are going to be declining coming up. So our campuses have a lot of work to do in the DEI space. But I hope you're all kind of taking on DEI training. I mean, I think our grad enrollment folks in particular have to have that training. At the undergraduate level, you can somewhat get away with it if you're at a place that's predominantly white and, you know, they're just serving more affluent white audiences. But especially with grad, you have a very diverse audience that, first of all, it's the right thing to do. There's so many things that we need to do in supporting students of difference. But then also in just the imperative of the way our space is moving, and how can we make sure that we're creating access spaces and making students feel included as part of a community, and that even though I'm a privileged white male, how am I making sure that students of difference are being supported through our process and at our schools and through graduate enrollment as a whole, and ultimately graduating and being successful, and what's our schools doing to support them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would throw in there as well, to piggyback on what you're just saying there, Marcus, you know, DEIB, right? With that, how do we foster that sense of belonging, particularly within graduate students that may have, you know, competing interests outside of the classroom, or maybe are predominantly online, you know, the virtual sense. How do we foster that sense of belonging and making sure that everybody, you know, feels that sense of connection to the institution? We are 3 minutes over officially. So I thank you all, Marcus, Jeremiah, Naronda, Ryan, for joining us today and giving your expert thoughts and guidance on a variety of topics. And thank you all to all the participants. We had just over 200 people here, and it was great to finally be able to get together and have this conversation. Kevin, I believe you have a couple housekeeping things before we finish.
Yeah, absolutely. If you all could have seen me off camera nodding my head and agreeing with literally the past 45 minutes. I spent a lot of time in grad admission, so definitely agree with pretty much everything you all were talking about. So thank you all, the panel, as Jenna said. Again, for any of the folks that are on the session today, if you have any questions or you need help, you can email us at marketing@carnegiehighered.com. You probably saw in the chat I posted a link to the Connection Hub page, so you can look at different sessions that are coming up throughout the day and for the rest of the week. Next up is a session, another session by our friends at McGuire Associates, The Age of Personalization: Shifting Strategies and Maximizing Yield Through Individualized Communication Yield Aid Strategy. So there's a mouthful there, and that gets started at 2 o'clock. So again, everyone, thank you for your time this afternoon. And Kathy, I see you out there. Thanks for joining us, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.